In today's episode, I'm joined by Jake Watson.
We're
going to talk about how long you should rest in between working sets. Jake, we were having a discussion this morning.
We were.
Here at MJHQ, when you come in and you do everyone's weekly massages, weekly torture, weekly deep tissue massage. And we were talking about rest periods in between working sets. And in particular, we were kind of comparing, I guess, the pros and cons of short rest periods compared to long rest periods. And then we started talking about, you know, generally speaking, aesthetic-based athletes or athletes training for aesthetic purposes, trying to build, you know, the way they look, build a physique, will generally take shorter rest periods, whereas performance-based athletes, and in particular strength performance-based athletes, are generally taking longer rest periods. So let's just put it out there, man.
Yeah, man.
What are your thoughts on this whole rest period debate?
So like this kind of like sparked off an initial conversation where like I asked basically Joe, I'm like, what are your thoughts versus resting for a shorter period of time and therefore not recovering quite as much between sets versus that trade-off of taking a longer rest period, possibly being able to move more weight into the next set, and the effects of hypertrophy. But from that, that's just like, we've extrapolated that into like this whole different kettle of fish that we're talking about here. So probably on like the most basal level, it's the same as what we talk about in most of our videos. What's your why? So like that's a big thing. So, you know, like Louis, before we walked in here, one of the boys was like, oh, make a comment about how if you're not a powerlifter, you shouldn't be resting for 5 minutes. It's like, that's a pretty like interesting topic to bring up because you do tend to see it a lot in the strength community where it's very commonly accepted to take a long rest period. And then traditionally—
And when we say long, we're talking like put a time limit on it.
I would say like anything above 3 to 5 minutes in the gym, it's probably considered a long rest period. Like, I think that's probably
whereas an aesthetic-based athlete, it's like 1 to a minute half, 2 minutes is like, okay, now it's time to actually go lift some shit.
100%.
You know what I'm saying?
So it's like, one of the things I used to say to my guys was that like, if you need more than 5 minutes, like generally speaking, it's probably not to do with like strength recovery or anything like that. It's probably like, your cardio just probably sucks, man, to be honest. Like, so like, you know, there is an end limit in that, in my opinion. Like, not necessarily hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, if you're trying to get through a workout and it's taking you 2 hours just to get through your squats, it's like maybe look at your cardiovascular health a little bit, because that's like a whole nother argument. In terms of performance though, like what we were talking about, especially on like pressing exercises, where like we were discussing it in terms of like lactic acid buildup in your delts. Like, you may find that you're just not able to replicate your weights across sets taking 1 minute rest periods. So then you've got that trade-off. It's like, well, say I want to do 5x10 at 60 kilos on strict press. Am I going to sacrifice that weight and have to drop to 40 kilos to take a minute rest? Or am I better off taking the 2.5 minutes and overloading the muscle with that higher weight range? My personal opinion, I'd be pushing the slightly longer rest period and going for the weight. Because if you can get the time in the gym, if you're not running on like a 45-minute time restriction, I honestly don't think on a compound lift it's going to make that much difference. And then if you want to push your body through with the harder, shorter rest periods, do it on things like lateral raises, where like, who honestly gives a shit if you're moving 5 kilos versus 6 kilos? It's all about the muscle stimulation for that anyway. And I'd share that opinion across both bodybuilders and powerlifters and strongmen and CrossFitters and Olympic lifters. Your assistance work is assistance work. You know, the weight on that is really, really arbitrary, personally speaking.
So I think, like, from my perspective, there's definitely a linear relationship between the amount of time you rest for and then the amount of weight you're able to move.
Oh, 100%.
Definitely. 100%. Like, if you take, let's take, for example, let's use a squat, for example, right? You throw 100 kilos on a squat and you may be able to, up until failure on that first set, get 10 reps, for example. If you rest for 10 seconds, you're going to be able to go chase maybe 1 or 2 more reps.
And then you're essentially doing rest pause sets.
Exactly. Whereas if you rest for like 2 minutes, you're going to probably, you know, be able to get maybe 7 or 8. If you're resting for like 5 minutes and completely allowing, you know, the muscles to recover, ATP to resynthesize,
cardiovascular to drop back down, all those
central nervous system to recover, then you're probably going to be able to do pretty close to the 10 reps again.
Yeah, well, 100%.
Right? If that's your failure
should,
level.
like, when you're looking at like an appropriate rest period like that, you should theoretically be able to work around that like 8 RPE, like across all of those sets. Like, you know, it doesn't matter how hard that last rep is. If you've gotten those 5 minutes, 6 minutes types of rest period back in, you should find that you can like really hit that. And for an exercise like squats, I'm a big fan of doing it like that. Like, you know, I think a lot of people are probably on the side of being a little too cautious with things like that, getting those shorter rest periods in when they're not actually walking in under muscular fatigue. It just so happens that they haven't caught their breath yet. And it's like, dude, take the 2 minutes, catch your breath, let your blood pressure go back down, let your heart rate drop a little bit, get that other hard set in. When you want to get the shorter rest periods in, do it on your leg extensions. You know, take a minute rest in between those, take 30 seconds rest in between those. Because the overall demand on your body is a lot smaller. Like anyone who's done like a set of 10 to 15, 20 reps on a squat knows, it's not necessarily just letting the muscle recover, like, you know, just your soul needs to come back into you a little bit as well.
You're taxing everything.
You know what I mean? And like, you know, that can take a little bit of time. So when you're looking about the effectiveness of that workout, don't be afraid to give your body that little bit of extra recovery that it needs in that regard, because there's so many stimulus factors going on in your body that aren't just muscular, that you need to give you a chance to recover all of those. And it's also looking at, like, if you give yourself enough recovery on those big movements, you're going to keep some energy in the tank for being able to get through some good assistance work. Whereas if you try and slam out your squats with like minimal recovery, trying to keep your heart rate up and all that, that's awesome. That might even be what you're training for. But you also might find that you're too burnt out to have an effective assistance workout throughout the rest of the session, which is something that I've definitely found in the strength community as well. People tend to shy away from some of their assistance work. They're like, they think 5x5 is a workout, and like, it's not a workout. Like, you need to be doing your assistance work still too.
I guess then from my perspective, right, you know, the ideal situation for moving the same amount of weight and putting the muscle under maximum stress and you know, exactly what you just said, it's fine, but you know, I'm doing 25 to 30 working sets a workout. If I'm resting 5 minutes in between,
it's gonna drag.
You know, like I'm training for the whole day. You know what I'm saying? So for me, there's a little bit of a trade-off as well, where I'm saying, okay, you know, perhaps it's not as important to me to be able to do, you know, another full 10 reps at 100 kilos on squats or whatever the numbers may be, and I'm willing to sacrifice that to actually
100%.
get my workout done in like an hour and a half.
And that was one thing. And that was one thing we said as well. Like, if you're willing to set 2.5 hours aside for a workout where you can devote 45 minutes just to your main exercise, by all means, go ahead, do it. It's wicked. Most people, you're looking 45 to like an hour and a half in the gym. Probably, I think that's probably a pretty fair assumption for most like working people, like trying to get in and train. And like, we've talked about this heaps of time though, when it comes to my opinion, when it comes to applicable exercise for your outcome. And sometimes like worrying about getting through a big squat session might not be the best option for you in that regard. And it's that same thing, like, you know, if your cardio is not up to scratch where you're like recovering sufficiently between your sets to be able to work effectively, maybe you're better off doing an easier exercise where you can slam that muscle group in a little bit harder. Like, you know, it's all good and well to say that the compounds are going to be your best bang for your buck, and personally I think for the most part they can be, but there's extenuating circumstances to look at that as well, and time restraints are a huge one. Like, you know, even if we want to like divulge a little bit off working sets a little bit there, we got to look at like mobility, warm-ups to squats. Like, if you're squatting 220, you've got at least like, you know, 10, 15 minutes just of warm-up sets to get up to that weight, versus you can get on a leg extension, just start cranking shit out. And then it's like, you know, then you can start going like, sick, now I don't need to worry about keeping my rest periods to a certain thing. So there's a lot of variables you can play with, and obviously we know when it comes to weight training, modified stimulus is huge. Like, you know, you can look at something like cut your rest periods short so you don't have to be lifting as much weight. That's another really good one, because as we know, less weight, generally speaking, you keep better technique, less prone to injuries as well. Conversely to that though, coming in where your heart rate's still through the roof and you're not hitting the set because you just want to get it over with, that's where you want to look at where's that optimal recovery point for you going to be. So I feel like I've kind of tangented a little bit on this, so we're going to like just clarify a few points in here. So my opinion on larger compound exercises, we're talking squats, deadlifts, even bench press to a degree. Like, you know, if you're holding a lot of tension, you can still be getting a lot of fatigue through that. Find the appropriate position where you can replicate within X percentage of those working weights. If you're walking in after a 10 rep set and you're only hitting 5 reps, you probably didn't rest long enough. If after 2 minutes you feel good to go and you can replicate that set, boom, you're in that sweet spot recovery wise. If your objective is overall weight, where all you need is more weight on that bar, rest as long as you need. But if you're hitting 3 reps and you haven't caught your breath after 6 minutes, it's not the weight, man. It's like, do some cardio. Like,
absolutely. And then, you know, the other thing that I'm going to say is, you know, don't fall into the trap that I see a lot of people as well, is they'll use resting as an excuse to, you know, around on social media in between sets.
I was literally just about to say this as well.
Talk to their mates that are training next to them and this and that. It's like, you know, are you resting, or are you trying to find an excuse
if you're bitching that you can't get through your goddamn session, but you spent half of it talking to your mate at the gym, that's your fault, not your rest period's fault. And that was going to be my point. Our phones are awesome. They have a huge place in it. A good tip to start with your phone, set a 2-minute timer.
Yep.
Put it down, that's the function your phone plays. Spend those 2 minutes to mentally prepare for your next set.
Yep.
Envision what you want to get out of that set. Look back at what happened in the set. So like, then it's looking at like, use your rest periods effectively, man. Don't look at it as wasted time between sets. Like there's so much self-reflection you can do in that time. Focus on what you want to get out of the rest of the workout. Focus on what you want to correct in that next thing. Think about where your muscle stimulation was. Boom, timer goes off, you're good to go. So that's using the rest periods intelligently as well.
And putting some accountability in there as well.
Yeah,
if you're using a timer, it's like when that timer gets to 0, man, it's time to go.
I've seen some people take some pretty long 5-minute rest periods, man.
Yeah,
like,
no
and we're all guilty of it, but it's that exact thing. It's accountability and it's training effectively and it's training intelligently as well. Because like you can spend all the time in the gym you want, but sometimes like, you know, you just got to train that a little bit smarter. And that's where like tweaking stimulus like rest periods can be huge, and like then how you use those rest periods as well.
There you go. Jake, thank you, man.
I love it, man.
I think that's a very in-depth discussion about...
we extrapolate a lot out of a very simple conversation on that one today.
As we often do. As we often
so much
do.
to talk about with shit.
Guys, that's a wrap for today's episode of MJ Everyday. As always, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, turn your post notifications on both on your mobile, your cell phone, and your desktop PC so you don't miss a beat when it comes to the Massive Joes YouTube channel. Until next time, coming to you from MassiveJoes.com. Stay massive. It's a good one.
Thank you for tuning into this video. We hope you enjoyed watching. Don't forget to check out our latest upload and our recommended video, and be sure to subscribe to the Massive Joes YouTube channel to stay up to date with all of our latest uploads.